things, and seeing her break through in that way, I think is really emblematic of what I see in a lot of podcasters. If you get in the studio, if you start recording in the studio, you schedule time in the studio, you will do magical things, and you will find that space to be a space that you love being in, and that it really shapes the way that you view all the future parts of the work. And not just seeing it as work, seeing it as like, wow, I want to get back in the studio and record something. Whether or not it ends up published on a podcast is not the point. It's really about being able to tell a story and being able to tell your story and being able to give other people access to tell their stories.
Why are stories so important to you?
I think there's the kind of blithe answer where I think in terms of stories. And so it's just obvious to me that everything should be a story, or that everything is a story. But I think something a little deeper than that is when I was growing up, I was surrounded by stories, but I wasn't always surrounded by people. And so, I had a lot of family around me my whole life. I had friends, here and there, but I didn't have a lot of really close friends. I wasn't going on a lot of play dates and stuff, probably until like the end of middle school. And so I kind of had glommed onto stories, and whether it was like cartoons and animes or Pokemon or whatever. And I just had become like a very big, voracious consumer of that sort of stuff. And it's really just how I thought about things. And my mom would play NPR in the car, and stories had just become a big part of the way that I viewed life. And I think also a big part of it, frankly, is that I'm really blind and that I can't see that well. And so I listen to things a lot, and oftentimes stories are really audio. And that's part of the reason why I got into podcasting, is because if I can hear things and discern the things that I hear, that's really important to me. And I'm being able to tease out the details in that way.
So David, you touched on this with listening to NPR with your mom and listening and enjoying and connecting to stories. And I'm curious, why did you stick with podcasting all these years?
I have a hard time stopping things in my life. And I think it's tough for me to kind of do something and then say no, or to figure out like, when is my role in this ending? And I think the people who know me really well know that I come up with random sayings, and they just kind of, they just kind of show up in conversation. And one of them that had come up with someone who's not a podcaster a few months ago was, it consumes me until I've consumed it. And I really believe that, it's kind of like podcasting had taken a hold of me. And I'm not much of one to believe in spirits or anything, but it's something that I could not get past until I had fully gone through the entire course of it. Almost like a treatment of like chemo for cancer or something. I mean, it was something I needed to do. There were times when I really wanted to quit. And there were times when it was really painful for me to continue on with podcasting. There were times when those things were connected to other things going on in my life, and specifically with school and how challenging school was for me. But there were other times when it just in and of itself, I wasn't sure if I loved it as much as I had anymore. And at the beginning, when we had started this, we had a 4-stage plan, and the plan was get something started. The first year, we only did like 6 episodes that year. The second year was get something established. Third year was have actual chains of transmission, so that second years transmit things to first years, and we're able to go on. And then the fourth year was like, let's break into the mainstream. I don't think we broke into the mainstream, but I do think that in terms of all that we've done, like, why have I not stopped? Like, why haven't I given up? Why did I keep going on? I really do think that I've loved it, and I've loved it for a long time, and it's been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. And these 4 years, like, even when you weren't around, and even when in every single year we saw that people I loved left, we still ended up meeting all these new people, and it became worth it again. And that was really cool. Every fall being able to see, like, who wants to do this? And it was kind of scary, because you would think to yourself, like, oh my gosh, like, if we don't get X amount of people who are into this, this whole endeavor is over. And it was just amazing that every year there was more people who wanted to get involved, and that re-energized me. And there was more people who fell in love with it again, and I fell in love with it again with them. And as I was just learning all the time, that just made it really worth it. And the things that I had wanted to do that I didn't get to do, both in podcasting and outside of podcasting, I think the cool thing is that as I've come to the end, I've really come to accept that and to appreciate that I wasn't going to get everything done. But the cool thing is the next people will, or at least they'll have a chance. And I think that's probably the coolest thing about it all.
One of the things that I can say is that whether I wanted to be or not, I was always learning with David. And I always wanted to be, even if it was annoying. My question for you is, what was your most valuable lesson learned in these 4 years? For you specifically.
I think the most valuable lesson, and I say this all the time, is that the process matters. That's just something that I learned a lot during these 4 years that I really can tell you 100% I did not appreciate before I came here. And before, I always wanted to move as fast as I can, and I wanted to get to the end of the process as fast as I can. You know, I would take any appeal as fast as I could. I would struggle and, escalate things super quickly. On a personal level, that's what I would do. I mean, personally, like if something was not right, I would get frustrated by it and I would react. I was so reactive, so unbelievably reactive. And I really learned, I think, and maybe this was just part of getting older. Like maybe this was just going to happen on some level. I don't know. But it seems to me that part of what I learned in law school, in Harris, in leading this organization was really just to take my time. Like, I don't really send out 2 a.m. emails anymore, or 4 a.m. emails, or 6 a.m. emails anymore. Even if I write the emails at those times, I just wait to send it until a normal hour. And that's not something I would have done before. Before it was like, all right, let's do it as fast as possible. Let's break things. That's what people would say to me, go fast, break things. And I don't know if that was my approach, but I really feel like taking the time and doing things right mattered. And I just want to say thank you, Bryce, because like there were times when I needed advice that I needed to slow down, and I would always feel like I could come to you for advice. And I always felt like I could get a sense from you of like where I was at, where you were at, where we were at, where the organization was at, and what steps were possible next. Not that we would even necessarily take, but what could we do, and whether it was, hey, maybe we do a podcast like this. Maybe we release at a time like this. Maybe this is how people can treat each other within our organization. Maybe this is how we can set up our meetings and start things off with like, how is people doing? And, I go by he, him, his pronouns or whatever it is. Like those are parts of the process. Like, where do you start? How do you do expectation setting when you have conflict? How do you resolve those? Those were really, really important things I learned from you and in my own way through just the process of going through this.
Why did you choose to start a podcast with the people that you did?
I'm not sure I really had a choice. Sometimes in life, you work with what you've got, like you can't start off in a place where you come there with an idea. Nobody else came there. Nobody chose coming to Harris to do podcasting before I had come to Harris and been like, I'm going to come and do podcasting. That was not a thing. So later years, when we saw at like different recruiting events, like Admitted Students Day and stuff like that, people would come by and they'd be like, yo, there's a podcast. And maybe that will play a small part in whether or not they wanted to come. And so in later years, there is that endogeneity. But in terms of starting, you start with the people you find. You start with the people who you may be surprised that these people have the same passion as you. And so I didn't know I would find you. I didn't know I would find Beth Karp, who's just a phenomenal person who saw a poster in the law school that you had posted and that I hadn't posted and came to one of these meetings and we built a years-long friendship. I didn't know that, Meghana or Max or Jack or, Matthew or all these people would come together and we would work on this podcast, Gustavo. We could just go down the line, Peter, Himanshu, like I said earlier, Lucía. I mean, we could go on and on and on for days. And all of these people, like, I didn't know I was going to meet these people, but they changed my life. And I hope that maybe I made a small impact in theirs too. But the work we did was phenomenal. And I really felt like it was impactful, even if it wasn't maximally impactful. I feel like the impact we made for the people that we did impact was real. And I feel like it really changed things.
I want to affirm that the impact was real. And I want to affirm that we changed things. What I want to know next is, what did you do, David Raban, that only you could do?
Wait until the siren was done?
That is something only.
Yes. That is something only you could do, said by Ben. Okay, bonus question here. Maybe it doesn't even go in.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned earlier how you have sayings and expressions that you come up with. One of those that has stuck with me through the years has been the progression from 0 to 1 and 1 to 2. So I was hoping you could say just what that means to you and how you've seen that in your life.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, going from 0 to 1 is really hard. And I've said this, I think I'm saying this basically in exactly the same way I told this to you in like September or October of 2016, all that time ago, that I had just been thinking about it for such a long time, and going from nothingness, like nothing existing, to something is such a radical concept. It's such a radical concept that they didn't even come up with the concept of 0 until way after they came up with the concept for the number 1, and shout out to the Arab scholars who figured that out. Just to put that out there. But all that said, going from 0 to 1 is really hard. And like creating something like that first year in some ways was always going to be the hardest year, because nobody knew what we were trying to do. Nobody knew what it was. Like I said, hi, I'm David Raban and I want to start a podcast. That's how I would greet people. I greeted people like that all the time. And they're like, oh, that's nice. I held a meeting a workshop where I thought people would come, and nobody came except for Beth came. And then that changed everything. But to say I want to start a podcast means you have to get the equipment. You have to have some kind of organization. You have to have an idea. You have to have someone who's going to do the interview, someone who's going to be the person who's being interviewed, unless you do a monologue or something like that. But that's not what we were doing. And to get all that stuff, to buy equipment, to get a room, to store it somewhere, to have people recognize us, to be able to do the work, to be able to have people even accept to be interviewed, to find people to do the editing, to have it be published, all this stuff, to get it marketed. To go from A to Z is so tough. And if you tell people I want to start a podcast, they just don't know what that means. They just don't know what it means, because it's in my mind. It's in my mind, and it's something that I can see in my eyes, behind my eyes. But it's not something that if I tell you, I have to walk you through every stage of it. You can't just imagine it by yourself. So for people to learn this stuff, they have to go, every single person has to go from 0 to 1 at some point if they want to do this. And then in addition, institutionally, we had to go from 0 to 1. And so that first year was really challenging. And I think this fourth year was actually really challenging too, because I thought to myself, what's going to happen when I leave? Is it going to just go back down to 0? And I think the thing that I'm the most excited about, maybe more excited about than anything else, is that I know for sure it's not going to go from 1 down to 0. At least it's not going to go from 1 down to 0 immediately. It may take a few years, but I hope not. And I believe that it's not. And going from 1 to 2 is really the next challenge. Going from 1 to 2 is what we're talking about now. We're not talking about going from 0 to 1. We're talking about going from 1 to 2. We're talking about going from 1 listener to 2 listeners, from 2 listeners to 3 listeners, from 3 listeners to 100 listeners, from 300 listeners to 3,000 listeners. And when we go from 3,000 listeners to 30,000 listeners, and then we really start making a difference, that's how I know we learned A, 0 to 1, and B, 1 to 2.
David Raban, what did you do that only you could do? What did you do that only you could do?
I came, and then I left. But on a serious note, I would say there's 3 things